The motorcade is going to head now to Arlington Cemetery. Both the president and the vice president will lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, of course joined by former presidents Clinton, Obama, and Bush. I want to go to Matt Gutman, who's on New Jersey Avenue in the Capitol right now.
This movement has been organized around a strategy called leaderless resistance since the early 1980s. Now that is familiar to most of us now as simply cell-style terrorism. The idea is that one or a few actors can work in loosely coordinated cells that are very difficult to connect together with evidence that can stand up in a prosecution in court or can sort of show us how these groups are interconnected. Now, this extremist groundswell today has a lot of different moving parts, and in some ways it's very different than anything we've seen in the past, because what we see is targeted radicalization campaigns online that are reaching people through QAnon and reaching people in kind of the stop the steal, garden variety Trump MAGA space, and pulling them towards these much more violent and radical ideas around accelerationism, around preparing for race war, around Klan and neo-Nazi belief systems, and around kind of boogaloo culture. Now, that mix of forces is new, but I think history can show us a lot about what has happened in the past when these activists have felt that political roads were closing and have then turned to acts of mass violence against American citizens.
Mary McCord, as we watch the limousine carrying President Biden, we have to get used to saying that, President Biden, and another limousine carrying Vice President Harris. How will the security apparatus in the United States change under this new president? How will it be reconfigured, refocused, do you think?
Well, I think if we're talking specifically about the approach to domestic extremism, I think we will see very early on, in fact, we heard some of it in the speech today, the inaugural speech. We will hear early on a commitment to combating domestic extremism. We already know the FBI has put resources toward this. As indicated earlier, Director Wray has been clear that the white supremacist threat is the greatest threat of terrorism in the homeland right now. And so I think the FBI has put those resources toward it, but what we haven't heard for the last 4 years is any leadership above that, really talking about the seriousness and significance of this threat. That's really going to change. I don't think we're going to see, new types of intelligence authorities or anything. We're talking about domestic threats here. They have connections overseas, international connections. The white power movement doesn't end at the borders of the United States, but we're really talking a lot about an internal problem. And so all of the normal resources that investigators have under criminal authorities are the kinds of things that will be used to try to combat this threat, to engage in a strategy of prevention as opposed through proactive types of investigations as opposed to prosecution after the fact. We don't want to be prosecuting things like the El Paso.
For 7 p.m. tonight. As you guys were saying, the social media accounts have also now been transferred, so that's what really makes it official, guys. The peaceful transfer of power now complete. Sandra, John?
Kristen Fisher, live from Washington for us. Thank you, Kristen. John?
The peaceful transfer of social media accounts at the very least. Let's bring in Karl Rove now. Karl, I know that you've been to 3 of these, 2 for President Bush, 1 for President Obama. Let me play just a little bit of President Biden's speech and get your reaction on the other side.
Problem with confined spaces, it certainly is. This is not anything like the security concern of a normal motorcade. The streets of Washington are as close to thoroughly shut down as anything we've seen in the modern era. Virtually zero vehicular traffic, certainly none coming over the bridges from Maryland and Virginia. All of it suspended because of the threat we saw going into today. Again, those fences, razor wire, not there normally, all new for this event, for today. Thankfully, all of it can be taken down in due time. Sadly, where they're headed, across town to the White House, just as heavily fortified. though with the temporary addition of the reviewing stand across the street from the North Lawn on this, what turned into a beautiful winter day in Washington, D.C. Again, this almost sad view, razor wire on the right, and the absence of Americans, the absence of the people who would normally be in our capital city to cheer on the new president and vice president, to observe this tradition we have, the peaceful transfer of power. You'll note that at the top of the screen, the only people left to watch the passing motorcade are members of the National Guard, in this case, standing at attention. General Barry McCaffrey is our guest. General, talk about the burden we have placed on the Guard and Ready Reserve, on the deployed DOD who are there in the city, and the notion just in the past few days that we've been let in on from FBI security briefings, and that is the thought of the actual threat from within our Guard and Ready Reserve forces.
Well, it's been a very painful discussion, and I say that as a grandfather who has a grandson in the National Guard. We shouldn't lose track of the fact that the Armed Forces of the United States are the most trusted institution in American society. Every poll says that, with good reason. They've been out there trying to keep us safe. 60,000 killed and wounded since the terrible trauma of 9/11. Now, having said that, when it comes to security, the President of the United States, the Secret Service is in charge. I've been involved in a lot of presidential visits. We've done things like taken the firing pins out of every weapon in a parade. The Secret Service should always have a zero security tolerance for potential harm to the President. 25,000 National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. They came from all over the country. They've been out there standing in the freezing cold. They were school teachers and doctors and people selling stuff in stores. Many of them are combat veterans. Their presence was enough deterrence so that we didn't have a disruptive inauguration, thank God. But also I remind people, when you're trying to get in the armed forces right now is a challenge. We're dealing with the top 25% of young American males and the top 15% of young American females. They do get screened. You can't have a tattoo of KKK or Nazi symbols. We watch their behavior, not their thinking. But clearly it requires scrutiny of who we put in the armed forces as well as law enforcement.
General McCaffrey will stay with us as part of our coverage. What you're looking at now is the end of...
Much China is trying to steal from us, our intellectual property, patent property. I mean, this is an all-out war, right? It's not one that we see in the traditional sense.
So both countries obviously collect intelligence on the other, but the Chinese have always gone much further than we have. We don't steal intellectual property to give to American firms, but that's what the Chinese government has done for decades, and they continue to do it, and it is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars a year to them and has made them a much stronger economic competitor. So that is one of the things that that President Biden is going to have to deal with.
Margaret Brennan is with us as well. Margaret?
Hi, Mike. I'm wondering on Iran, another American was just sentenced to prison in that country. And so many people I talk to say this is so predictable for Iran to present Joe Biden as a new president with a big challenge right up front, which is, what are you going to do about the Americans we're taking hostage? And what does that do in our leverage for any future negotiation on the nuclear front? How do you think the Biden team responds? Do they repeat the Obama policies?
My view, Margaret, is that the Iranians believe that a negotiation is coming. The Iranians want a negotiation. They want to get back into the nuclear deal. They want those sanctions gone. Their economy is in dire straits thanks to poor economic policy, to sanctions, and to COVID, so they are desperate for sanctions relief. So they want that. I think what they're doing across the board on the nuclear front and with the arrests and in several other areas is trying to, as you said, build leverage that they can use in those negotiations. So when they sit down to talk about the nuclear deal, we'll want to talk about those Americans who've been placed under arrest there, right? And they hope to get something for that. So that's what the Iranians are doing.
Are expecting it to be busy, and that's because I think the Biden team realizes they have inherited a lot of challenges that are going to be facing them, especially in this first year in office, Wolf.
I will be standing by for that. Jen Psaki, the new White House press secretary, will be briefing reporters later, I think about 7 p.m. Eastern later tonight. We'll be anxious to hear what she has to say as far as what the new president, the new vice president are actually doing. And the president is signing all these executive orders today. Very significant reversals of several policies put forward by the former President Trump. Our new senior White House correspondent, Phil Mattingly, is joining us right now. Phil, congratulations to you as well. I take it this is your first live shot as our senior White House correspondent?
Yeah, that's right, Wolf. Just about 12 hours ago I was in the Capitol, now moving back over to the White House. Look, I think this moment underscores how quickly the Biden administration is going to kick into gear, and I think Caitlin was laying out some of the details of that. You want to talk about what the Biden team and what the president is going to be doing in just a couple of hours when he sits down and actually starts signing those executive actions, both memoranda, executive orders as well. We're talking about re-entering the Paris Climate Accord. We're talking about halting the border wall construction. You're talking about different buckets of issues that I think you're going to see the administration push forward on over the course of the next couple of days and weeks, not just on the executive action front, but also on the legislative front as well. And I think that's why it's important to pay attention to what's going to happen at 5:15 in the Oval Office when the president sits down to actually take these actions. You're going to see actions on the economy, whether it's continuing eviction moratoriums, rental assistance, things of that nature. You're also going to see public health actions, whether it's talking about masking inside federal buildings, which the federal government has the ability to institute on its own, things in that area as well. Racial equity was something that the administration wants to talk a lot about. But there are limits. There are limits to what the administration can do. And so I think while you will see over the course of the next couple of days the administration try as best they can with executive action through their federal authority to move forward on these buckets, trying to address the multiple crises the president is facing as he comes into office, you also need to pay attention to the legislative work. Obviously, Caitlin was talking about the $1.9 trillion stimulus proposal they've already put on the table. You've got a significant overhaul of the immigration system that they're putting on the table as well. Keep a close eye on those, because if you talk to Biden advisors, they acknowledge there are things we can do from day one, whether it's reversing certain Trump actions, whether it's pushing forward, particularly on the health and economic front, to address some of the issues they think they can control right off the bat. But they also acknowledge there is significant work to be done, and a lot of that work can only be done legislatively, Wolf.
Phil Mattingly, our new senior White House correspondent. Phil, congratulations to you for putting together an excellent, truly excellent White House correspondent team. The motorcade is now crossed the Memorial Bridge, heading towards right now Arlington National Cemetery. You know, John, it's so significant. The first thing he's doing after this ceremony, the inaugural swearing-in ceremony, first thing that the new president wanted to do was go to the Tomb of the Unknown, pay his respect to the men and women of the U.S. military who sadly have passed away.
It's a very important event that serves two very important purposes for the new commander-in-chief. And you see the motorcade coming across the Memorial Bridge, crossing from the nation's capital across the Potomac to just over the other side of the river into Virginia, Arlington, Virginia, to this sacred place. It's such an amazing testament, tribute, shrine to American heroes. And so Joe Biden, trying to show that message of unity with President Bush, President Clinton, and President Obama, three former presidents, three former commander-in-chiefs, appearing with him and taking part in the very important message he's trying to project today, the new president. Let's try to bring the country together in the middle of this pandemic at a time of a great political divide. Let's at least try. And then, of course, as you mentioned, this morning, those troops woke up with Donald Trump as their commander-in-chief. Joe Biden is their commander-in-chief now. He lost his son, obviously, after Beau Biden dying of brain cancer after serving in the Delaware National Guard. This is a very important, out-of-the-box, early-hour signal of respect to the troops, respect to tradition, respect to heroes from the new president.
I want to get some perspective from Doug Brinkley, our presidential historian. Give us a sense of how significant, A, this day is, but what the new president and new vice president are doing right now.
Well, it's the exact right thing to do. I mean, in the inaugural address, Joe Biden talked about Arlington as being a sacred ground, and indeed it is. And he inferred that we're never going to give up that sacred ground. We're always going to remember our war heroes. And so to be going there with all the former presidents at his side, Wolf, is very meaningful. Jimmy Carter, of course, is not there, but it was very important, I thought, at the beginning of the inaugural for Joe Biden to even evoke Jimmy Carter, who's down in Plains, Georgia. Has been very ill, but, still wily. And here he is now with George W. Bush and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Ironically, all of these presidents were not military people. They didn't serve in the military. And in a different generation, you couldn't have even gotten into American politics without being in the U.S. military on your resume.
There's the Tomb of the Unknown. That's where the event, the wreath laying ceremony, will take place. We'll have the national anthem, touching of the wreath, 4 muffled ruffles, as they call it, taps, and a moment of silence. It's a very, very important event, John, and we know
loss he's dealt with, every professional setback he's dealt with. It's almost as if he had to go through all of those moments in order to be ready for this moment, right? And I think, that to me is what I heard there. And, Savannah, I'd love for you to comment on another thing. Joe Biden's faith, I have to tell you, I think, whether you yourself are a person of faith, I think that tenor and tone was so needed today more than any other day. There was a sense of, I had somebody email me and said, boy, he would have been a terrific priest. And I'm guessing old Joey, maybe that was a dream of his at one time too. But look, I am not as religious as some other people, but I find that him grounding himself in faith, and it's very authentic with him. I don't like to question anybody's religious beliefs, but he wears it on his sleeve, and it's very meaningful to him, and I think it really informs who he is in a way that is why he feels like he meets this moment. But I'm curious of what you thought of that, Savannah.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you asked me because I am a person of faith. I do think that he has that quiet resoluteness within him when he was, talking about the hymns and the anthems, and where he's calling on that sense of purpose and that sense of higher purpose, and yes, that sense of humility. I think that is something that's a telltale sign of someone's faith, his particular Catholic faith. The fact that he started his day in church and in this area, breaking with tradition, because he wanted to attend Catholic Mass and inviting the other leaders. And I think that, that is something that's very genuine with him and really pervades not just one section of his life, but all of his life. So I think
these markers, they have to have solemn remembrances of all. And as we were saying, George, they have been so involved with the military over the years, but it is the most profound thing Joe Biden will do is if he has to send young men and women into war. And that tomb and those soldiers standing there and that 21-gun salute are reminders of the seriousness of that, of the seriousness of the decisions any president makes. And this is what they think about or should think about when they're sending young men and women to war. Just how profound that is, George.
It hits close to home for Joe Biden, for President Joe Biden. Of course, as we've discussed, his son Beau did serve in Iraq. Stephanie Ramos, you covered him there.
That's right, George. I cannot help but think of Beau Biden today, President Biden's eldest son, who died in 2015 at the age of 46 years old. He was a politician and a lawyer in the Army National Guard. And I remember meeting him in 2009 when we were both deployed to Baghdad, Iraq, and he was so kind, so compassionate, and he didn't expand too much on his own political aspirations. But when I asked him about his father possibly running again for president, he said we would have to wait and see, but then he went on to speak so fondly of Joe Biden. He said his father loves his family immensely, his children, and his country. And it was just earlier this week when we heard from President Biden at that Army National Guard Center in Delaware, named after Beau Biden, where he said he should be swearing in Beau Biden as the 46th president of the United States. So a very emotional moment for President Biden as he reflects and remembers his late son, but also reflects on this new role as commander-in-chief.
We saw that emotion yesterday for the new president when he was saying goodbye to his home state of Delaware, remembering his son Beau, saying he always believed that he was the one who would be president, the Biden who would become president of the United States. David Remnick, editor of The New Yorker, is with us as well on the phone as we're watching this motorcade go on. David, I've been reading you for the last 4 years about Donald Trump, maybe 5 years about Donald Trump, sounding the alarms you thought for our country. Your thoughts as you watched Joe Biden give his inaugural address?
Well, the initial feeling is one of immense relief. Largely because Donald Trump, who is, I think, easily the worst president we've ever had, the most malevolent, one who seemed intent on wreaking havoc on his own country, is gone. And that power will leach away from him more quickly than I think he's even aware. The crisis we face is what he aroused. What, the terribly dangerous current of bigotry and malevolence toward the rule of law that he aroused in this country, and over 70 million people voted for him. How will they face the future? How will they face their next vote? How will they regard Joe Biden? That's an enormous burden on the new president.
Thanks in part to your reporter Luke Mogelson, we saw just how horrifying that crowd could become inside the Capitol 2 weeks ago. A real threat to members of Congress, real threat to our democracy. And now Joe Biden has to face the task of healing that democracy while also holding all those responsible accountable for what they've done.
This has always been the enormous burden of democracy in many ways. You just can't put thousands and thousands of troops on the street and then protect democracy. Democracy has to be protected as an idea and as a set of institutions with work that's even more difficult than any military or police force can provide. It has to happen inside of people's hearts and minds. And the question is, will Joe Biden and many others have the wherewithal to not only halt a pandemic, not only right an economy that's been jolted so terribly in people's very real lives, but to alter a kind of information space in which lies have become so prevalent that, as the authoritarian rubric has always gone, when nothing is true, everything is possible. That's the world we lived in the last 4 years, a real authoritarian attempt.
What can a president...
About sacrifice also, the bigger message is sacrificing for something or someone that is beyond yourself. And so for President Biden to be there with Presidents Clinton and Obama and George W. Bush, this is about those men who sacrificed on behalf of this nation and the men and women who are in turn there who did the same thing.
As we wait for the ceremony to take place that Jonathan is describing, Eliana Johnson, I want to come to you with what we heard Jonathan refer to just before that about after gratitude there comes joy. Are we being too optimistic, too rosy in our forecast about what may come now? What do you think?
I think probably so. Depends on the amount of joy one can feel at a return to sort of normalcy in American politics, which had their own issues before Trump came along.
To me, this day, I may, given my political inclinations as a conservative, may not share the ebullience about the particular people coming into the White House, but the sort of low-key cadence of the day and the normal aspects of it, I think, are good. And I have to say, I think the country, both on the left and maybe particularly on the right, are simply exhausted from 4 years of President Trump. It's nice to see something different. Just 5 or 6 hours from now, we will probably see a slew of executive orders coming down from President Biden, including rejoining the World Health Organization, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, reversing Trump's ban on migrants from majority Muslim countries, etc. So, I'm looking ahead a little bit, and I think very quickly we'll be into the politics of this presidency after what's been a very nice day, and thus far, thankfully, no incidents of violence or unrest.
So, Eliana Johnson, are you forecasting a very short honeymoon that will end with the signing of these executive orders that Yamiche tells us is coming? What did she say? 17 executive signing statements in the next hour or two.
I think Biden will have a bit of a honeymoon. Certainly, you can see in the media's response, there's a different relationship between the White House and the press corps, a friendlier and more congenial one. But to get anything meaningful through in terms of legislation, Biden and Harris will need to partner with congressional leaders, most importantly, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and they're going to have to strike some cooperation if they want to move forward. And that's sort of back to complicated politics as usual.
Amy Walter.
From gumming up the work.
The vice president, the vice president's spouse, and all the members of the family for 3 or 4 hours while all of these marching bands parade in front of the White House down Pennsylvania Avenue. So I don't know if President Trump would have been invited to come to this or not, but it's a moot point because he's decided not to attend any of the celebrations today.
Just bigger picture, just not part of the inauguration today, to not have him in attendance, Carl. Have to point out that does break precedent to not have him there for the swearing in.
Yeah, we've had 4 presidents who did not attend the inauguration of their successor. The first one was John Adams, who maybe didn't mean a lack of respect for Thomas Jefferson, but the only stage that got him to Baltimore left at 4 a.m. in the morning. So he left on the morning of the inauguration and left Jefferson to leave the Conrad and Munn boarding house at New Jersey and C Street Southeast and walk 500 yards to the Capitol for his swearing in, accompanied by some diplomats, some interested Washingtonians, and a few members of Congress, and conveyed by the marshal for the state of Maryland. The U.S. Federal Marshal for Maryland was his escort. John Q. Adams similarly decided not to attend the inaugural of his successor, Andrew Jackson, in large part because there had been a little bit of a contrast. Adams' wife was not of particularly good health. Jackson originally said, why don't you stay at the White House until it's comfortable for you to move, and then said, but I need you out by, later said, I need you out by the night of the inaugural because I'm going to have a big party. And so John Q. Adams said, I'm not going. The last one was Andrew Johnson in 1869. Grant said he wasn't going to meet with him, his successor. Grant said he wasn't going to go out of his way to consult with him. And literally, Johnson made the decision literally the morning of the inaugural. He's signing the final papers and documents that Congress has sent him. And Income Secretary of State Seward, who says, now aren't we going to get ready to go to the Capitol? And Johnson says, I'm not going. And Gideon Wells, the Secretary of Navy who was sitting with him, wrote in his diary how thrilled he was that he was repaying Grant for his insolence by not going to the Capitol. But this was well considered by President Trump and announced some time ago, so we shouldn't have been surprised.
I was looking.
A necessary stop for all those visiting the nation's capital. The guards who patrol back and forth are not without an official task. In addition to that, they have been known, and school children especially should be known to expect, if anyone sits down during the ceremony or chews gum or eats food or is talking loudly, they will stop in their tracks to enforce quiet and discipline and attention.
Leaned on Joe Biden at one time or another in their presidencies.
And you know, to pick up on that, Major, he, as a president, can return the favor, which is when you're a president, you have ex-presidents that you can use and deploy in really important symbolic ways and to put attention on issues. And President Trump didn't do that with his former presidents. And Joe Biden undoubtedly will return to that practice.
One of the things I always found most hard to listen to with President Trump was how he would criticize so intensely his predecessors in ways I'd never heard an American president refer to anyone who came before him. And that always sounded so different and, in certain respects, unjust to them and the difficulties of the job and what they tried to accomplish. We will not hear that again from President Biden. There's no way.
One of the most controversial decisions opposed by a number of military leaders was the drawdown of forces, particularly in Afghanistan, to 2,500. That was one of the last acts and decisions made by President Trump. I want to bring in Margaret Brennan on that. And in your reporting, just how controversial was that decision?
Well, it goes against the advice of the top military brass, as David Martin has chronicled. It also just really emphasizes, Nora, one of the main crises that Mike Morrell just told us about that may confront Joe Biden in the first few months, which is the Trump administration struck this deal with the Taliban that promises that U.S. troops will go to zero in the coming months, that we will go from 2,500 down to no presence based on conditions on the ground. So this will present Joe Biden with this decision as commander-in-chief now. Does he stick with that agreement? Does he try to change the terms, in which case it could trigger more of a conflict with the Taliban? And it frankly goes against something he campaigned on the trail about, which was he also promised to bring troops home. As you pointed out, this war began about 20 years ago, and it continues to be very popular to say, let's end any U.S. combat presence. But this is very complicated. And
President Bush's have a friendship, sort of an unlikely friendship. There are those wonderful shots of Michelle Obama with Bush at the McCain funeral. And then we also know, just going back, George W. Bush and Clinton were sent to Haiti. Obama dispatched them to Haiti. We know that they've worked together, famous relationship between George H.W. Bush, of course, and Bill Clinton. And I think seeing them all together is special.
And there we see President Biden walking in. He will be right at the center of this. Let's listen in.
To President Biden and how it has brought him here today and arguably made
National Cemetery after laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns. And now it will be to get into the motorcade, Sandra, and off to the White House and to the Oval Office and the Resolute desk, where I'm sure that the president will take a moment to sit behind that desk for the very first time. Clearly, he's been in the office a number of times, but he'll sit behind that desk for the very first time as president and say, wow, it's happened. I'm the guy in charge for the next 4 years. And let me tell you, Sandra, I have talked to former presidents about that moment, and to a person, they have all said that it was something extraordinary.
Just a beautiful, beautiful scene there as we saw the new president and the vice president pay their respects to those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice for this country. What a scene for the world to see right now, John, on this Inauguration Day 2021. Let's listen. And that concludes the ceremony there at Arlington National Cemetery. Bill Hemmer is in Lafayette Park there. Bill, we saw your coverage this morning. What a day this has been. What a beautiful moment that just was at Arlington National.
Sandra, good afternoon to you and John. That was quite an awesome moment there at Arlington. That is the stop for now, but in a matter of moments, the next big stop will be here along Pennsylvania Avenue across the street from the White House. Sandra, this is what we expect. A few blocks down here, around 15th Street, thereabouts, now President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will take a few block walk, you could say. I mean, listen, normally, I mean, this whole street behind us would be filled with bands from all over the country, and they'd come here a week in advance, and they'd be playing their songs, and they'd be carrying their banners, but none of that's happening this year. However, around the 3 o'clock, 3:15 hour, we should see what's called a virtual parade. Not a ton of detail about it, frankly, but they're going to try and pull in different elements from across the country and all 50 states, and we'll see how that goes together as it unfolds. Many of the inaugural planners here believe that it would be similar to the Democratic convention that was virtually all virtual, and we weren't quite sure how that was going to go. They stuck to script. They had a message, and we expect more of that today within the next hour. So
we will see the new president walk to the White House. He will have a military escort down Pennsylvania Avenue. He will walk up the north driveway to the north portico. There will be that amount of normalcy, but then while we are used to seeing throngs of thousands at the inaugural parade and participants in the parade from all over the country, this will just be a different year. One of the other things that is different about this year is that President Biden is going to sign 15 different executive orders, I believe, on substantive matters, everything from rejoining the WHO and the Paris Climate Accord to ending the Trump Muslim ban, to calling for a 100-day nationwide mask challenge to try to stop and slow and ultimately stop transmission of the coronavirus for the first 100 days of the administration. A lot of presidents sign 1 or 2 executive orders or symbolic proclamations day one. Biden's going to do a lot of them, and a number of them are going to be quite substantive. When they say they're getting to work day one, they really are. So there's a lot yet to come over the course of the day as we head towards the last 2 or 3 hours of daylight in Washington, D.C.
You know, friends, I'm struck, and I don't know if the rest of you are, and to pick up on what you're saying, Rachel, I'm struck by the formality of it. These are always extremely, obviously, very formal events, but the people who put this together, the folks who planned this inaugural, despite all of the challenges, they went to great lengths to sort of reestablish the transition of power as we knew it, the traditional sense. Even Lady Gaga, who we know can belt it out, did a very traditional version of the national anthem. Everything has been very rooted in a kind of Americana-style tradition that I think is an attempt to take back what was stolen from this country on January 6th. To say that we're going to seize back, the idea that there is this
sort of ceremony to our government existing and to having 46, commanders in chief. And I think that that's maybe part of their attempt to kind of take back what was lost. And I also think that the parade being kind of empty makes sense. We've lost 400,000 Americans. I know it traumatizes me. Every time I listen to Nicole's Lives Well Lived, I burst into tears. I don't know how she gets through it. But I cry like literally every day at that point in time when Nicole reads those obits, because Americans have a strange relationship with death. We, nearly fell apart and panicked when nearly 3,000 people died in a horrifying terrorist attack in 2001 and changed all of our policies because of it. We don't deal well with one plane going down. We Americans have a strange relationship with death. And when you take that and make it a 9/11 a day, it's shocking to me, as Rachel said, that we haven't had a formal statement about that until now. President Joe Biden gave us that moment when I think a lot of people were crying, including myself, as they lit those, those lights along the National Mall or along the reflecting pool. So I think an empty-ish parade fits the mood. I think this has been a really well done ceremony for the kind of America we're emerging as after 1/6, which I think is one of those dates that's going to live like 9/11. We'll never be able to really put it behind us or forget it. It changed us, and I think this was a reflection of Joe Biden's determination to seize it back.
And Joy, I think what caused the Democratic Party to lose some Latino supporters. Now, Biden's proposal is far-reaching. Among other things, it opens a path for citizenship to 11 million undocumented immigrants. Like you said before, there are caveats. They would have to pay taxes, pay a fee, pass background checks. It does shorten the time to 8 years to get citizenship if you qualify. But there are some elements here that are very different from past immigration reform bills. And that is that it would provide a fast track to legalization for dreamers, for those who have TPS, temporary protection status, and to some farm workers. And it would allow undocumented immigrants who are deemed essential workers during this pandemic to apply for work permits and also for temporary deportation relief and eventually request permanent residence. I think there's a very important element, Nora, albeit symbolic, is that it changes the language referring to undocumented immigrants as non-citizens instead of aliens.
And that's an important point. Ed has been looking into some of the details of this plan as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Marielena, good to see you. One thing we've learned here in recent days is as the Biden team was laying out this ambitious immigration plan, they cautioned advocates who've been pushing for it that he's unlikely to make good on his pledge to get this done in the first 100 days, citing the impeachment, citing the economic issues that we're all facing in the pandemic, of course, as reasons why that may actually dominate those first 100 days. I know in your past life you were among those that was pushing the Obama administration and holding them to account to the point where interviews with the then president and vice president could get a little testy when they were reminded that they had not fulfilled their pledge on immigration. What happens this time among Latino Americans, among Latino voters, who we saw voted a little more for Republicans this past time, if he is unable to meet this pledge again?
Oh, it's a problem if he's not able to keep this promise because, usually they don't understand that, especially Latino voters, that it really takes Congress to approve a law such as immigration reform. They didn't have the 60 votes. President Obama didn't have the 60 votes. And it will be an uphill battle. In the Senate, they need 10 Republicans to agree to it. Now, we heard Lindsey Graham a little while ago. I heard him talking to you, Nora, where he did say that he would support an immigration reform that would open the door for the legalization of immigrants. But, the word that you say, amnesty, it's sort of like a bad word. Some people treat it as if it were a contagious disease, so they decided to maybe change it to legalization instead of amnesty. They attempted, Barack Obama attempted, and Bush attempted to get it through Congress, and they couldn't. Now, one thing that some immigrants will not have to wait for is coming in the form of executive orders or actions, either on day one or in the next 100 days, and that is to halt the construction of the border wall, to reunite children with their parents that were separated at the border, to extend DACA and allowing new applicants for DACA, to revoke Trump's plans to include undocumented immigrants from the census, and Biden also intends to roll back Trump's deportation priorities, although it's not clear if that means putting a freeze on deportations. Obama was very criticized for having deported the most amount of immigrants in history.
Yeah.
Several major decisions undertaken by the now former President Trump. Caitlin Collins is over at the White House right now for us. So Caitlin, set the scene once again for us.
Well, Wolf, it's notable because this is the first time that Joe Biden has been back at the White House since, of course, he and President Obama left when Donald Trump was inaugurated 4 years ago, when they had that meeting on the front steps of the White House, of course, greeting one another. And this is his first time coming back because there was no pre-inauguration walkthrough like typically new presidents do enjoy. But of course, Biden is already familiar with the White House and with the West Wing. He's not someone who has to have his first time in the Oval Office. It'll be his first time in the Oval Office as president, which of course is notable for sure. And while he is at Arlington Cemetery on his way over for, of course, that parade in front of the White House, his staff is already underway getting to work inside the West Wing, unpacking their offices, meeting with IT to get their computers hooked up, and even the photos on the wall have changed, Wolf, just in the last several hours. When we got here this morning, they were blank walls, as you could see. Now they've already been replaced with photos of the new president and the new first lady. Those are already lining the walls of the West Wing just in a matter of hours. It's amazing how quickly they turned the White House over here. But Wolf, the other thing that's different is the COVID protocols, because, of course, for the last 10 months or so of the Trump administration, you often saw pretty lax protocols. Sometimes masks were required, sometimes they weren't. Senior staff were tested, but then sometimes, they weren't tested on a daily basis. We're seeing a lot of different practices already in place here where staff are required to wear masks. Of course, so are reporters as well. Reporters are required to get tested to get on the White House grounds now on a daily basis. And also they've installed plexiglass barriers on desks in the West Wing. I saw some Secret Service officers with them on there as well. So you're already seeing some changes underway even before the new president has arrived here on the grounds, which we are expecting him to do in just a short matter of time, Wolf.
And it's so important that this new administration is setting a very positive, important example for the American people. They're wearing masks everywhere. We see everyone from former presidents, current president, the current vice president, they're all wearing masks, and that is so, so important given this pandemic that's still very, very awful right now. Phil Mattingly is over at the White House as well, he's overlooking the White House, I should say, right now.
About this. There was this mood of respect, and I think you saw it in how people interacted. There was this moment of relief. That's why at the end when I introduced the president for the first time, I said this moment we have all been waiting for. For some that meant the end of the ceremony, but for many of us it meant that we needed to, in Joe Biden's word, end the grim era of demonization. And again, I know it's not going to be easy, but I promise you up on that stage there was nothing but respect.
What did it mean to you that Vice President Pence decided to come? Obviously, former President Trump chose not to be there, something that we have not seen in more than 150 years, but Vice President Pence decided to come and represent the past administration. What do you think that meant to the proceedings, and what did that give to the American people?
I thought it was incredibly important, and I got to talk to him for quite a while about what had happened the night of the Electoral College vote, when in the end it was Senator Blunt and I in our positions and Vice President Pence that were walking into that room after the Capitol had been under siege, walking to the House of Representatives with the remaining ballots to get that done. And we went back over that night and what had happened, and then he talked about knowing that it was important to be there today. And I think you saw a cordial exchange between him and Vice President Harris and their spouses up on the stage, and the respect. So, I don't agree with him on a lot of things, that is clear, but I think he did his job today, and he left the Capitol with respect for the incoming administration, and that's what we needed. We didn't get it from former President Trump, but we got it from a whole bunch of other people that were up there.
So we had this moment in which folks seem to be, generally feeling good about the future, and then you're about to have
an impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate. Does that roll back any goodwill that was earned today? What does that look like?
You know, for me, given what you've heard from Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House, about how this president betrayed his oath, it's our constitutional duty to consider the impeachment articles that came over from the House. And what this would mean, if concluded, would simply mean that a president that incited a riot and attack on the co-equal branch of government couldn't serve in office again. So let's look at it as simplest. But I think one of the things the American people have to understand is we can do 3 things at once. The American people are juggling their toddlers on their knees and their laptops on their desks, teaching their first graders how to use the mute button so that they can go to school. And we should be able to do, say, nomination hearings for the president's new cabinet in the mornings and the impeachment hearing in the afternoon, and give pandemic relief passed at night. We should do at the very least what the American people are doing, and that is juggling a whole bunch of stuff at a really hard time in their lives.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you for your time today. I would like to say my first grader can do Zoom better than I can, so I can verify what you said there. Thank you so much, Senator. We appreciate it.
Savannah, thanks, Lester.
We want to turn to Kelly O'Donnell. She has moved from her earlier position.
Sofa, you'll pay nothing.